Angels Care Home Health, serving Hayes and the surrounding areas, is a Medicare-certified home health agency providing quality skilled nursing and restorative therapy services to patients in their homes.
They're polite. I mean, they just take the time for you.
Angels Care is there to help 24 hours a day, and all services are covered 100% by Medicare for patients who are eligible.
I like the Angels for what they've done for me.
Angels Care Home Health. We serve patients.
Eagle Community Television presents Community Connection with your host, Mike Cooper.
Hello and welcome again to Community Connection from Eagle Community Television. Thanks for watching, and thanks as always to our producer of the series, Jeff Durall. We're at the Hayes Senior Center, east of Hayes on Old Highway 40, with Cal Harbin, who is celebrating and has celebrated with the community a special open house, the celebration 100 years with Cal Harbin, our community connection. Well, Cal, we got to start at the beginning, so tell me about the family.
Well, I was born into a family with 9 children. I was the middle one, and I had an older sister and a younger sister, and I was the first one to go to high school. I graduated, and believe it or not, a local school hired me as a teacher, and I taught school for 3 years when I was 18 to 21 years old. And at the end of that, I decided to go to California. So I moved from Missouri to California, to Bakersfield, California, and I got a job in a law office, and I was tutored by 3 lawyers and prepared for the bar. And my main boss died, and I bought the law office and rented it to the other lawyers until I was ready to go into the Army. When the law passed in 1940 for military training, I picked up the phone and I called the draft office and I told them that my number was 355 or something, and they were up to 52. And they said, it'll be a year or 2 before you're called. And I said, well, if anybody can't go, I'll take their place and get it over with. 1 year. The next day I got a call, report to the draft board. And I found myself at Fort MacArthur, and the week later I was on KP, and the next week they sent me to Texas City, south of Houston, and I stayed there for a year and a half. And the general down there selected me to be his communications sergeant major. I could take shorthand and type, and I had a little legal training, you know. And he and his wife decided I should be on his staff as an officer, so he sent me to OCS. He picked the one up in North Dakota because it was administration. And I went up there, and 87 days later, I graduated as an officer, 2nd lieutenant, not a member of any branch. And I thought I would go back to Texas to work for the general, and is General Edward Stockton. He was from Hollywood, California. And the general that made our commencement address decided I should go with him to Washington, D.C., and I had no choice. So we took the train, I got to Washington, and he said, I'm going to put you on my staff as help me with a magazine. He put out an Adjutant General's magazine once a month, and I didn't want to. And he said, well, in that case, you can go to Philadelphia. We'll assign you to Philadelphia. So I got to Philadelphia, and they said, we're going to assign you to Overseas Replacement Depot, and you'll be overseas. So they sent me up to Shenango, Pennsylvania, to be prepared to go overseas. Got up there, and the general said to me, I've got 14 lawyers, and we have to get these soldiers ready, check their insurance, check their powers of attorney. If they're getting a divorce, we have to prepare them legally when they go overseas. He put me in charge of that department, and he gave me an assistant, a man from Greece, Nicholas Titangos. I spoke English, he didn't. And 3 months later, I got a phone call. We're going to move you to an adjutant's job over in Wilkes-Barre, and it's 100 officers, an enlisted man, and they get 400 draftees a week. So they sent me over. I had to go the next morning. I got to Wilkes-Barre. I stayed over there a while, and then I had a family that decided I should have Sunday dinner with them. And when I was having Sunday dinner, they said, "It's too bad that you're not going to get to come back next Sunday." I said, "Why?" They said, "Well, you've got orders." I said, "I don't have any orders." And the young lady that had invited me said, "Well, that's what they told me." So the next morning, I went to my commanding officer, and I said to him, "I heard that I was on orders." He said, "Yes, unfortunately." He said, "I hate to lose you, but he said, I've had your orders for 4 days." He said, "You're due in New York City tomorrow morning." He said, you go out and tell everybody goodbye and leave." Said, "You can get there this afternoon." And I did. I got to New York City. I had an address to go to. I went there and I knocked on the door, and somebody said, "Come in." I went in, and he said, "Go over there and knock on that door. Go inside, stand at attention, salute, give your name and your number." And I did, and the man said, "I hope you haven't been foolish." That's what he said to me. He was sitting down behind the desk. I said, "Now, what does that mean?" He said, "You'll find out." He said, "We've been reading your mail for about 3 months now." And he said, "You're under orders not to write any letters, make any phone calls, or make any contacts." He said, "You come back here and at 2 o'clock and I'll brief you." And I said, "What for?" He said, "You'll find out." He said, "Go and get some lunch." So I went out of his office, and I said to the boy outside, I said, "Where can I get some lunch?" And he said, "Well, I'll send you to the PX," and he said, "You can get a drink and a sandwich there." So I got a cheese sandwich and a glass of milk, and I went back. And you know, he briefed me on a mission to Europe, and he said, "We'll put you aboard a ship at 2:30 this afternoon, and you will stay there until you join a convoy." It was an old Russian ship that had brought vodka to the U.S., and they couldn't get back, and so they leased it to the War Shipping Administration. I stayed on that old ship. We left. There were 58 ships in the convoy. I didn't speak Russian. They didn't have anything to read. The light was very dim. I didn't play chess, and I didn't drink tea. I had a terrible time. 22 days later, I got off in Liverpool, England. And when I got off, I went down the gangplank, and here was a man with a salute, not an American salute, a British salute. And he said, "Courtesy of His Majesty." And I put out my hand, and he gave me a whole bunch of tickets, kind of like you get at a theater, you know. And he said, "Be sure and save the, when you get on the bus," he said, "the bus driver will tear the ticket in two and give you half of it back. Be sure and save it because you can ride back here on that ticket." So I got on the bus and I went up on the top. It was one of these double-deckers. I went on my mission, what I'd been told to do. Incidentally, I argued with him. I said, "It's not right. I don't like it." He said, "It's not yours to question." He said, "You're ordered to this." And so I had to do some things in England that I didn't want to do. And he told me, he said, "We thought England would fall to the Nazis. And you were getting some things out of England for us that we could use." He told me what to do and what to find and what to bring back with me. And when I got back, I left that Russian ship and got on an American ship, and I came back to the U.S. We got back in 18 days. We got to New York City. They came out and got me off the ship and took me in for a debriefing. And they had two crews. One of them asked me a whole bunch of questions and took the stuff that I brought back. I had it in my pockets, what I could remember. And then they gave me another team that asked me many of the same questions. I said, "They asked me that." And they said, "Well, what's your answer?" They were checking me to see if I was honest. And when I got through, they said, "Well, you just barely got time to take your dirty laundry in and buy some new stuff and get some shaving materials and toothpaste, and you're on your second mission." So they put me back aboard a ship that same afternoon that I got back. And I made 7 missions to Europe. I went to England several times, and sometimes I'd get off and go to France. And then I went to Belgium, and I went to Holland, and later on I went to Italy. I was in northern Italy about the same time Bob Dole was. And then they decided that I should be a ship commander. I was in security work up until that time, and they said, "We're going to send you to New Orleans for training. You have to learn how to feed 1,400 people aboard a ship and their sanitation." And I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "Well, they have to go to the bathroom." He said, "You have to get about 50 at a time up on the main deck to use the latrine, and you have to feed them twice a day, and you have to have a place for them to sleep." He said, "We're going to train you in that." So they sent me to New Orleans. When I got through, they gave me a ship. I had to sign the invoices of everything on the ship, be responsible for it. Then I had to put all the food aboard. Then I had to put the bedding aboard, you know, the pillows and stuff. And they gave me a footlocker with penicillin and aspirins and stuff. They didn't have a doctor for me, so I had to hand them out. And I went to Genoa, Italy. I had some stuff for Switzerland aboard the ship, so they brought a train down, and we unloaded the stuff for Switzerland, and they sent it through tunnels through the Alps up to Switzerland. I stayed there in northern Italy from October to January. And after I think it's about 2 weeks after I got there, a man came aboard the ship, and he told me he was from Australia. And he had a Jeep outside that he wanted to put at my service. He said, "I stole it from the Americans." He said, "You're an American." He said, "I'm going to let you use it." He said, "I'll be your chauffeur." So I visited orphanages and butcher shops, and I went to a jewelry store, and I went to a convent that had children. 58 children with the nun in charge. I visited several places around there, and I'd come back and I'd sleep aboard the ship. But I had a staff of 14. They spoke different languages. I had Jewish, and Italian, and Spanish, French, and I had some that knew 2 or 3 languages. I had one boy from Mexico, and I'd send them out, and they would get stuff for me, bring it back. I'd consolidate this. I'd make it secret, seal it, put it in another envelope and mark it restricted, and I'd get it to the Americans for sent back to Washington, D.C. And I got back in January of 1946. And they said, well, it's time you got back. We're going to send you to Korea. So they sent me back to California to await transportation to the Far East. I waited from April to 1st of August. Nothing happened. I was by myself in an empty barracks most of the time. No place to go, nothing to do, I had to report every morning at 9 o'clock to see if my orders had come through to leave. They finally said, we're going to send you up to Northern California to await shipment over to Korea. So I waited a while, and I said to them, I could be going to school. She said, well, you've got a commission. I was a captain at the time. She said, if you'll give up your commission, we'll commission you in another branch of the Army. I was a little suspicious. I was a captain, not a member of any branch, the Army of the United States. The old Army was the U.S. Army, and I was in the Army of the United States. So I gave up my commission, and the woman commissioned me again in the individual ready reserve Army of the United States, and I'm still in it.
Because you're getting a pension, right?
She let me go, yes, a big one, and she let me go to the University of California. So I had a year of schooling before they pulled me out. And then I asked for permission to go to college. They let me go. I got a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a doctor's degree, and then I went to the University of Chicago for a summer. And then I went to Harvard University for a year on the faculty. They appointed me to the faculty. And I drove my Army pay, Harvard pay. I got in trouble with the IRS when income tax came, though.
Now, how did you get from Harvard to Kansas?
Well, I was in Kansas first. When I came to Kansas, I got my doctor's degree, and I'd never been in Kansas, and I didn't want to come. The Army was going to order me to active duty again, and I thought I was going to go overseas. And the chairman of my doctoral committee came to me, and he said, Mr. Harbin, he said, we have a request to select somebody for a job out in Kansas, and the committee has met, and they had 3 people, and they thought you would be the best one to represent us. And I said, I don't want to go to Kansas. He said, well, the committee requests that you go to Kansas for at least 9 months. And he said, you need to go out there for an interview. And I said, I don't have a car. And he said, well, you can rent one. So I rented a car, and I came to Kansas, and I was interviewed by M.C. Cunningham. Now, it turned out he had a doctorate from the University of Missouri. And he had courses with the same professors that I had. Dr. Rufai, Dr. Carpenter, Dr. Watkins, and Dr. Townsend. We had almost parallel doctoral programs. So he appointed me as an assistant professor, and he gave me philosophy and psychology and education, division commander.
The story continues from Fort Hays State University.
At the end of the year, he made me a full professor, and he made me a friend and a confidant of him. I became on his Senate. I advised him. I was on committees that he had appointed, and he took me with him every time he went on a commencement address. I went with him 17 times for commencements. I went with him to Kansas City when he was going to Chicago. He would fly to Chicago, and I went with him almost every time he left the campus. We went to Pittsburgh. I was scheduled as a speaker.
Hold that thought for just a moment, Cal. We're going to take just a break and return to Fort Hays State University with Cal Harbin, our community connection.
Angels Care Home Health, serving Hays and the surrounding areas, is a Medicare-certified home health agency providing quality skilled nursing and restorative therapy services to patients in their homes.
They're polite. I mean, they just take the time for you.
Angels Care is there to help 24 hours a day, and all services are covered 100% by Medicare for patients who are eligible.
I like the Angels for what they've done for me.
Angels Care Home Health. We serve patients.
We are at the Hays Senior Center, east of Hays on Highway 40, with Cal Harbin, as we're celebrating 100 years with Cal. We pick up our story at Fort Hays State University, as he is a confidant to then-President M.C. Cunningham. Probably except for that wreck that you had with the president, right, Cal?
Well, I was a speaker at a conference, a state conference in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and the president said, "I'll drive you down there." So we got in his car. He said, "I'm going to take the graduate dean with us." So I sat in the back seat. We got down there. We had the conference, and I made the big speech. They had 2 or 3 little ones, but I made an hour-long speech, and when we got through, he was waiting for me, and he said, "Come on, let's get back to Hays." We got in the car and we started driving, and at Girard, Kansas, we had a wreck. A car ahead of us stopped and he ran into it. And a car coming to meet us ran into the 3 of us. One of them was off the highway, and our car was completely destroyed. The police came, and they took us to their police headquarters. I spent the night, and so did he. And he called, and a man from Hays came. He had the bookstore out at Fort Hays, across the street from Hays. He came and he got the president and me and brought us back to Kansas. The couple that was coming to meet us were from Russell, Kansas. They came on to Kansas. They got other transportation. They committed suicide a week later in Russell, and we never did get over that. The president retired in 1969 and took a job with the Hansen Foundation. He was there 10 years, and when his 10 years was up, he told them to get me. And so they hired me, and I stayed up there for 24 years. I was a counselor to the Hansen Foundation.
Tell me about, briefly here, Cal, Fort Hays State University. What do you remember about the campus during your tenure there?
Well, it wasn't very much when I came. We had to recruit students, and we had trouble getting students. We started the nursing school. We had to get 20 students. we had a terrible time recruiting 20 students to go to the nursing school. And we had teams to go out. Hugh Burnett was one of them. Ralph Huffman, Red Huffman was another. I would go with them, and I would talk to the high school seniors. Dr. Ira Scott was another one. I made trips all over Kansas, and we finally would get as many as, say, 600 students. And the freshmen had to live on campus, and the seniors could live off campus. We had very strict rules. We'd throw students out for infractions, and they told me that I was to try to take the older students. So anybody that was married, I was to be their advisor. So one Sunday afternoon, somebody knocked on my door, and he said, "Doc," he said, "they told me that when I came to Fort Hays, I would be your advisee." He said, this was Sunday afternoon. I said, "Come in." And it turned out to be Vernon Kistner. And he came from La Crosse. He was a mechanic down there. He was married and had a couple of kids. He said, "I'm not making a good living, and I want to go to school." And he said, "I'm going to move to Hays," which he did. He got a job as a policeman nighttime. And he finally graduated from Fort Hays in mathematics. And he took a job with a Hays High School. And he retired from the Hays High School, and he had, I think, 6 or 7 children, and he was a friend of mine. And all these years when he was working for the police, he would come to my home in the evening, and he would pick up Eddie, take him out to his police car, and talk with him, and maybe give him a ride around the block and these lights up here. That's why Eddie's in the police, law enforcement.
So Vern Kisner is responsible for that.
And when Eddie decided to work for the sheriff's department, and he was running for his first term, and he's been in, I think, 4 terms now, 35 years.
35 years, just
Yes.
recently honored.
And Vernon Kistner brought a check, and he said, "Doc," he said, "give this to that boy. Give us," and he gave Eddie a check to help him with his campaign. And his daughter became my personal banker with the Bank of America, and still is out there with Bank of Washington, First Kansas Bank, and Zimmerman.
How long were you at Fort Hays, Cal?
30 years.
30 years.
52 to 82.
Now, we've got to move in our time remaining to the Senior Center.
Okay.
Because this was one of your crowning achievements, I think.
I had 10 of them.
10 of them. And this was only one.
Senior Companion was one.
A Senior Companion was another, yes, indeed. All right, let's start at the top here.
Okay. 2 years before their retirement, 2 people came to me, Dr. Moreland and Leora Stroop, and they said they were concerned and worried about what they would do when they retired because they hadn't saved any money. And Leora had never married, and Dr. Moreland had a daughter that lived someplace, Minnesota, I believe, and he said, "I'll be a pauper in 2 years' time." And he said, "I've got to do something about this." And he said, "Leora and I came to you to talk with you and see if there's anything we could do." So we formed a committee, and I was the chairman. They elected me chairman. And we met 2 or 3 times, and then I started looking for a place to meet. And I found a church that had a parochial school, and he said we could use their lunchroom after the students ate. And a week that we were to start, he said, it's vetoed. You can't use it. So I went looking again, and I found Reverend Miller that let me use the basement of the Methodist Church 3 months. And so we took it, and I stayed there 3 years. I borrowed his kitchen, his silverware, his tables and chairs. He poured coffee for me. The president's wife, Mrs. Gustad, was the program director. And we had Bob Glassman drew up some, I think, articles for me, and we organized.
Let's go down that list of names if we could, Cal. Bob Glassman.
Here are the people that really helped me get started. Bob Glassman, a lawyer. Mike Billinger, who was the mayor of Hayes. Reverend Miller, the pastor of the church. Mariana Beach. And Ross Beach gave me money. I could go to him and get $5,000. Usually he wanted 500.
You talked him up to 5,000 then.
And then this Harry Watts, Dr. Watts, an eye doctor. Then Mrs. Gustad, the president's wife, of course. Homer Schwartz, the FBI man. And then Bob Dole and Keith Sebelius were great helps. They helped me get money. They'd let me come to Washington, and they'd take me to lunch, Senate lunchroom. There's where I had my bean soup for the first time. I didn't like it. But I told them about the senior center, and I told them what I was doing, and they said, that's such a good program. If we can get started, it'll never end. And I used to tell that back in Hayes, that Bob Dole said it'll never end. Bob came for a commencement address, and I was his host. I didn't know he had a bad arm, but I had to put his cap and gown and all this stuff on him and escort him to the stage. And we were friends all of his life. He used to write to me all the time.
Well, now, in the Senior Companion Program, the first director was Howard Sloan, right?
Well, I went over to the president's office, and I told him that I had the money, and I wanted to do this, and he said, don't you have enough to do? And I said, well, I've got a chance to do that. I'd like to do it. He said, well, okay, I'll give you somebody to help you. So he gave me John Garwood, who had been the dean out there. And John said, Howard Sloan works up at the bank. He said, we can get him to help us. And I said, well, how much will it take? He said, well, he's making $5,000. We'll offer him $10,000. So Howard resigned, he came out, and he stayed with us 10 years. He was a wonderful administrator.
But you got another administrator after Howard.
His assistant was Jolene Nurnberger, and she worked there. And when Howard decided he wanted to take another job, Jolene took over, and Jolene has been there all the rest of this time.
Did you give her $10,000 too?
We didn't give her anything. We authorized her to ask for a budget, and I got a man by the name of Jim Burns who had given me the original money, and he would let her propose a budget proposal, and he would give her the money. So she has done that, the budgetary work and the selection and the supervision for all of these years, and that program has gone on for, I think, about 41 or 2 years.
At least.
And it gets more successful every year.
Now, we've got about 4 minutes left, Cal. I wanted you to address the Senior Center, which we are located in for the Community Connection. The Board of Directors, Alice Beasley, Leora Stroop, Joe Brungart, yourself, and Fred Richmeyer. This Senior Center was not without some startup problems, was it? Understand you had a run-in with several agencies?
I had run-ins galore. I was up at the law office almost every day.
Almost every day.
First time, we had a woman who came the first time, and when she went home, she called and said she was bringing a suit for $1,000. That when she left, the wind blew the door and she thought her knee was hurt, and I didn't have any insurance. So I found out that I was supposed to have insurance. And I asked what it would cost, and it's several $1,000s. I didn't have any money. So I had trouble there. And then I was accused of running a taxi service, picking people up and taking them home after the meals. So I got in trouble there. And then I was accused of being anti-business, taking business away from local entrepreneurs. They said they were getting free coffee, and they'd charge a dime for it if they had to buy it. And then I got charged with not filing a tax report. I didn't collect sales tax. I didn't know I was supposed to collect it. And then I got accused of not having the food handlers inspected by doctors to make they were healthy enough to handle the food. I thought to myself, why did I ever get into this? Bob Glassman would say, well, take it easy. Bob was a veteran, and so was Keith Sebelius, and they would be my counselors. When Keith would go to Washington, he'd take his weekends out here in Kansas. He lived, I think, in Hill City.
Yeah.
And he said, well, you just take it easy. He said, you're a soldier. He said, you know what to do. He said, you can change if you have to. And he said, you can raise money. And so I was the chairman of that thing until I decided I've had enough. And I asked the president for a sabbatical. He gave me a sabbatical. I went back to law school in California, but I never lost my interest in that program.
Now, in our final couple of minutes, Cal, what's the secret? What's the secret of a lifestyle to reach 100?
Well, when I was in California, I got acquainted with the Mormons. They had a little leaflet called the Words of Wisdom. They claimed that you shouldn't drink coffee or tea or soft drinks. I said, I don't drink them anyway. And so they said that you should take plenty of exercise and you should eat less meat and plenty of vegetables and fruit. And the head of the law firm where I was a bishop. He would go back to Salt Lake City, and we talked, and he decided that I was going to be a lawyer. And when I was bar eligible, I was to take the bar examination and join the firm. And so I would work in the daytime, I would go to school at night, I'd go home, my mother would make me a supper, and then on breakfast, she'd make me a scrambled egg with chopped ripe olives and an orange, and I would go to work, and I'd work all day long, come home, change clothes, and go to school. I worked day and night, and then all of a sudden I was in the Army, and I did have to work day and night. I'd work on KP in the daytime, I'd be a charge of quarters at night. I'd go on midnight, I'd go 10-mile hikes, you know.
Cal, I'm picking up here that the secret of your success has been to work day and night constantly.
Right. Yes.
And celebrate 100 years.
My wife told me one time, she said, you've got a family, but you're married to your job. You work day and night. And when you're not working at your office, you're working here at home. I often would get up at 4 o'clock and work till 6
And there you have
in the
it.
morning.
Your secret to success at 100. From the Hayes Senior Center, Cal Harbin, our community connection.
I still get up at 6.
Angels Care Home Health, serving Hayes and the surrounding areas, is a Medicare-certified home health agency providing quality skilled nursing and restorative therapy services to patients in their homes.
And the Angel Care nurse comes to see me once a week.
Angels Care is there to help 24 hours a day, and all services are covered 100% by Medicare for patients who are eligible.
Angel Care has helped to stay home.
Angels Care Home Health. We serve patients.